So, like, to continue to go back to that well of, like, oh, anti-Semitism because World War II. World War II! World War II. Don't you remember World War II? Shut up. All right, so I want to talk today about a hot button topic, and that's going to be Israel. And the reason I want to talk about it is I feel like there's a growing sentiment that people are just kind of fed up. And it's not just with Israel alone, but Ukraine as well. And I think Ukraine is kind of winding down, so that's why I'm focused a little bit more on Israel in this conversation. But just in general, I think people are fed up with the U.S. going to war and spending billions, hundreds of billions of dollars to fund wars in other places that really don't concern us all that much. And what I'm going to do today is I'm going to review Lex Fridman's podcast because he had Douglas Murray on and they talked about a bunch of these topics, including Ukraine and Israel. I wanted to review this one because there's also another podcast that Douglas Murray was on, which was Joe Rogan's podcast. And that one has been dissected thoroughly up, down, where he was on with Dave Smith. And he basically did himself no favors, where he basically just played credentialism, which is kind of hilarious because he himself criticized people who were experts who were giving out bad advice during COVID, and more recently criticizing wokeism. But then he flips the script and now he kind of says that you can't really talk about these wars unless you are an expert. So anyways, he kind of beclowned himself in that situation, but in this interview with Lex Fridman, he gets a little bit more time to kind of speak his mind and be open about it, and I think that will lend to a little bit better commentary from me. So I want to take a look at that, and then we'll get right into it, and I'll get some of my thoughts on it as well.
Can you take me through what happened on October 7th, as you understand it? And as you outline at the beginning of the book?
Well, the book on democracies and death cults is a mixture of first-hand reporting and observation, interviews, and a wider reflection, not just on the war that's been going on since the 7th of October, but the war's been going on a lot longer. And also, I suppose, on what for me is one of the overwhelming questions, which I'm sure we'll get to, which is the reaction in the rest of the world. Obviously, on the 7th itself, it was a brigade-sized attack on Israel from Gaza. Hamas broke through the security fence and attacked all the softest targets they could. They swiftly overwhelmed things like the observation base in Nahal Oz. They ran through the communities in the south, very peaceful, peacenik, effectively communities of the kibbutzim, as they're called, the communities, and murdered and raped and burned and kidnapped. And of course, they, from their point of view, had the great good fortune of also coming across hundreds of young people dancing in the early hours of the morning at a dance party and rampaged through that with RPGs and Kalashnikovs and grenades and hammers and more, and got within, 20 kilometers into Israel, places like Ofakim and Sderot, important towns, and carried out their massacres there as well. We now know that the plan was that Hezbollah did the same thing from the north. Hezbollah joined in the war within 24 hours by starting firing rockets again in very large numbers into northern Israel from southern Lebanon.
So I'm just going to talk about the Gaza portion of it, right? Because that's, honestly, I don't think that's where it started, because I think this has been bubbling for years, but that is where the most recent flashpoint that got us into the conflict that we're seeing now began. And it was awful. It shouldn't have happened. I think there's a lot of pretext to it, though, where you kind of make your own bed, right? And I think Bibi Netanyahu, essentially what he has done, and anyone who knows kind of the recent history would tell you that Israel and the people who are in power essentially have stood up Hamas in Gaza and kept them generally in power. And the reason why is because when you have a hated enemy, an enemy that's very easy to vilify, then it justifies almost any action you take towards them. And again, what happened is awful. Hamas shouldn't have done it. But when you are being essentially the lords over those people, you have all the power, you're essentially living in an apartheid state, then what happens is that obviously there's going to be some sort of uprising because you're treating them poorly. There's a bunch of people, piled up on top of each other in poor conditions, and you have attacked them multiple times in the past. And then, of course, at some point in time, there's going to be an outlash. So, and it's not, again, I'm not justifying what happened at all, but that's just in saying that there is a reason, in my opinion, why it happened, and you cannot say Israel was not to blame at all for the situation that they find themselves in.
But the plan was that they would do the same thing from the north and carry out similar massacres there and effectively be able to meet in the middle and garrote Israel from the center. The interesting reason why, I think it'll be found out in the future, but why they didn't coordinate better was Hamas didn't trust any line of communication to Hezbollah to let them know exactly when they were going to do it that wouldn't be intercepted. The Iranian revolutionary government in Tehran, which obviously funds Hamas and Hezbollah and trains and arms, knew of the plan. It was a very successful attempt to annihilate the state, but they didn't get close to that, but they got worryingly closer than people might have thought they were capable of.
I think that's a bit of an overstatement of what happened. I don't think they, as he even stated himself, they didn't even get remotely close to that. It was just basically lashing out and attacking. And to kind of present it as both sides were going to collapse and overthrow Israel is kind of laughable, and kind of seems like, looking back, hindsight is 2020 now that Hezbollah is joining in. But the problem is pretty much all of the region is unified in being against Israel and what they're doing to Palestine. That's why last time Trump was in office, he had the Abraham Accords, was to try and normalize relations in the region, is because everyone over there all hates each other. And that's a bigger point that I'm going to be making, though, is that these are all just blood feuds. And why are we sticking our nose in something that's literally never going to solve anything ever? Because they all just hate each other, and there's infighting constantly in the region.
I think from the Israeli side, it was obviously one of the most, if not the most catastrophic intelligence and military failure since the foundation of the state. And I think there are several reasons why. One is a perception problem. What a lot of military commanders and others described to me as the conception that had prevailed in Israel for some years in the security and military establishment was that Hamas were content with being corrupt and governing Gaza and, lining their pockets and living in Qatar and becoming billionaires, but that, like many other terrorist groups and cults, that they would end up becoming just corrupt and not losing their ideology, but the ideology becomes secondary. That's the first thing, was there was just a massive error of the conception in Israel. And then there are the multiple, manifold security and military failures of the day and leading up to the day. And there already have been quite a lot of people held to account for.
And I think that's a huge point as well, in that supposedly Israel is this hugely successful security state where they know everything that's going on, and that's where you can kind of fall into, I think some people will fall into a conspiracy theory I'm not 100% on board with this one, but where you say, kind of like 9/11 here, where you say, did the government let this happen? And again, I'm not saying I believe in either one, but you could see why, if they're supposed to be so advanced and they should have known what was happening, you say, did the government let this go through so that then they could justify going into Gaza and completely leveling it? And I would say that I could not fault someone for having that thought about what happened on October 7th. So again, and he even says it's a huge failure from the side of the Israelis. So again, he's backing up my point on this. It just doesn't really make sense, is what I'm trying to say.
There's a Muslim doctor I quote in the book I interviewed who describes how he was going to he's an Israeli Muslim Arab, and he's a doctor, he was going to his shift at the hospital at 6:30 in the morning. The rockets start coming in because the rockets started first and then the full invasion. And he described to me how, he's one of the members of this group, the United Hatzalah, which is a first responders group. And they sort of, they get an alert and it tells them that, a car has crashed nearby, and they put on their, first aid kit and so on and go. And he got one of those alerts at one of the junctions and realized there was a car, that something had happened and there were some dead bodies. And he stops and he sees these men dressed as soldiers, and they start, and he's wearing his Hatzalah gear, and they start firing at him. And he just thinks, what the hell is going on? And they turned out to be Hamas dressed as Israeli soldiers. They used him as a human shield to try to protect from any air assault.
And what I'll say about this, he's just basically describing guerrilla warfare. Any country with the means or the ability to do these kinds of things, this is just kind of standard. Yes, it sounds horrific to the average person when you're describing it, but at the same time, this is nothing new. This is, again, I'm not particularly impressed or compelled by this argument.
I think that most people are sort of still Israeli and not Israeli, including people who are anti-Israel, who just believe that, Israeli military and particularly intelligence dominance is so strong that there must have been some kind of conspiracy. Otherwise, how could this have happened? I don't think you need to go into that. I think that, for instance, some of the young women at the observation base are on the record. They've said, I've spoken to them myself, and who said that they had been warning in the weeks running up to the 7th that they were seeing maneuvers and training by the border, which suggested that Hamas was going to do something like this, and they say that they were ignored. You speak to some of the more senior commanders about that, and they say the thing is that this stuff was happening all the time. So it's very hard to know at the moment.
So again, that points to the question that I had, which is, and the point that I was making, where they are so far ahead, and again, how could someone not question it that it is a conspiracy theory, that it was allowed to go through and happen? So not even conspiracy theory then, if it's proven correctly. But he's just further proving the point that there was something going on where they allowed this to happen for a reason. There is even people who are, like he said, at outposts, viewing a buildup of activity, reporting it, and they get ignored. Well, what's the purpose of that? He doesn't dispel any of it at all. He just basically agrees and then retreats and never actually answers the question about why it wouldn't have been a conspiracy, why you shouldn't believe a conspiracy theory, or what's wrong with that conspiracy theory. So again, it's very, very poor argumentation on his behalf. Not even argumentation. I'm not sure how he's trying to defend it on this.
Can you talk through your understanding of who and what Hamas is, its history, and the governing ideology of this group?
Well, Hamas, in a way, quite easy to understand because they say what their ambitions are. They say what their beliefs are. They've said it from their governing charter onwards. And you also have the advantage with Hamas that they, as it were, in trying to understand them, is that they tend to do what they say and act on what they believe. The primary aim of Hamas is to destroy the state of Israel and then see. They're not an unusual group, sadly. The bit of it that is hard for some people to understand, I think, is that they really do mean what they say, and that they really do mean what they say they want to do. And I give a number of examples in the book of this, but I mean, the most obvious is the case of Yahya Sinwar, the Hamas leader, who is generally regarded as having orchestrated and arranged the 7th of October. We know a fair amount about him because he was in prison in Israel.
And again, this is proving the point that I was originally making, is that they stand up this group that has the stated goal of eliminating Israel so that you can, it's basically cry wolf, right? You get attacked, and then you point the finger and say, oh, it was their fault. But all along, you've known you're the one standing up this group as Israel, which is well established. Israel is standing them up, and then you're, crying when you get attacked. And I'm not sure how this is a surprise. So, this argumentation, again, he's just proving my point correct, where Israel is the one that's responsible for them being in power in the first place, so that they're justified when they go in and completely destroy Gaza as a retaliatory act.
Is it a hatred of Israel, or is it a hatred of Jews? Is it on the level of nations or the level of religion?
Both. It's both. I mean,
So actually, I don't completely disagree with that, because at a base level, though. So I think at the deepest level, yes, it's both, because they don't hate Jews as a people. They hate Jewish, the religion. And that's just Muslims and Jews. The two different beliefs. There's even infighting within Muslims and different sects of Muslims. It's the same thing. Is like, imagine if here we had different groups of Christians, Protestants, Lutherans, all these sects of Christianity all go to war with each other. That's the same thing as what's going on over there. So there's all these groups that are all infighting, and then surprise, surprise, it's not the Jews, the people, but it's the Jewish religion that they hate. So that's part one. So I do agree that it's both. But I think the more causal reason in what happened on October 7th, so again, that's just base level dislike of them, but why what happened on October 7th is proximity, which is the question that was posed. And I think that one is more prescient, because when you're living in proximity and you have so many people in the Palestinians that are all jammed into one small little area, and you have walls around them, and you control whether they can come and go, and it's just all these things that you're basically in control of this population that you hate. You hate them and they hate you, and that's just kind of how it is. And of course, it's not hard to imagine that they're probably getting treated poorly when they are going back and forth, and not all of them, but a good deal of them, and by the IDF or the Israeli military. It is not surprising at all that Palestinians would harbor a hatred for Israelis just based on proximity. They don't have a lot of land. They're all, if you look at Gaza, it's basically all these 5, 6, 7, 8-story buildings, slums, just all everywhere. That's all it is, because their population is so huge and it's so concentrated in such a small area. So of course there's going to be an explosion of hatred. And when you're looking and seeing how Israelis live versus how you live, and this is another big point that I would like to make, is that they're not stupid. They know that they're living that way based off of, yes, some of the stuff that they do in tech, but then also subsidies from the United States. Well, that's going to harbor a deep resentment. It's not just going to harbor a deep resentment for them, but for us as Americans too. And when you're being oppressed and we're allied, who's to say that we're not going to get hit with a terrorist attack, or that doesn't raise our profile in that region? Because again, there's a lot of Muslim countries who are sided with Palestine against us. So it may not be that the Palestinians can get here and attack us, although with a global world, I think they can, but also that these other countries could send people over to execute attacks against the United States. And that's why I think we need to just get out of the region, stop propping up Israel, but I'll go back to the video.
It originates from a religious mindset, but it's of course political as well. I mean, the Hamas Charter, of course, some people sort of think the Hamas Charter is of no significance, and I often notice this sleight of hand that people do. Again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Forget everything other than the most important basic things. But the Hamas Charter, among other things, quotes the hadith that the end times will not come until all of the rocks and the trees shout out, "Oh Muslim, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill him." And that is so. Hamas is both obviously anti-Israeli, obviously, and anti-Jewish, obviously. And
that's actually a good point that I'm trying to make with the whole, it's like Hatfields and McCoys. This whole area, they all hate each other. Not, obviously there's some groups within it, but us inserting ourselves in there is literally not going to solve anything until one group eliminates the other. And I always make a joke about it. It's a very morbid joke, but I say just let them all Highlander each other. One of them comes out ahead and we can become friends with that one. The other one eliminates all the others. Why are we throwing in essentially what's a money pit into trying to solve a problem that's never going to be solved? Because all of these groups, as long as there's any sort of population remaining in any one of these groups, there's going to be constant infighting forever. And that's a sad truth. It's hard to hear, I'm sure, but that's just a sad truth of this area in the world. And it's not all people, but there are enough powerful people who are making the decisions and groups that this will never be solved, ever.
It's and by the way, I mean, one of the many painful stories I tell in the book, but is of the fact that so many of the people in the communities that they attacked, it's not as if there'd be a right community to attack and a wrong community to attack, but that many of the communities they attacked were communities which deeply, deeply dreamed of the idea of living in peace with their Palestinian neighbors.
Number one, what proof do you have of this? Number two, why are you diverting off? I mean, this is completely off topic from the question that was posed. So when I see someone do this, I say, okay, well, you don't have a real argument, so you're just reverting to sympathetic pleas, where you're just, they wanted peace, they wanted to live side by side. No. Whether they did, even if they did, let's give them the most generous interpretation and say that, yes, they did want to live side by side. The issue with that point is that the government is still going to continue to prop up Hamas and treat them poorly and, be oppressors over them, so that they're going to lash out consistently. So it doesn't matter what the population wants. If you continue electing leadership, that's going to continue to stand up Hamas. Well, then you have a rabid dog on a leash, basically, and you're going to let it bite certain citizens so that you can remain in power and you have an enemy and you have justification to go in and bomb Palestinians. I mean, that's just as plain as you can state it.
The response to October 7th by Israel. Can you steel man the case that Israel went too far?
Well, the case that started from very early on that critics of Israel had was the claim that, I mean, I think I first heard it on about the 8th of October, before Israel had done anything in response, was the claim that Israel must...
What? No, I'm pretty sure October 8th, every single person was saying, I don't know who he's talking to, but every single person was saying, oh, this is so horrible, how could they do that? I think people only started getting frustrated with the coverage of it when you're seeing just these images where just the entire thing is just completely leveled. Yeah, how is this justifying what happened? Yes, again, October 7th was horrible, but their entire city is leveled. You bombed it with American dollars. That's when people started saying, maybe you went a little bit too far. How can you ensure that you're not killing just an insane amount of women and children when you've completely flattened the entire area indiscriminately? Yes, you've told them where you're bombing, but if for whatever reason they don't get the message, how many families do you think died in this blast? That's when I think people started getting upset with what was going on in Israel's response to Gaza. So to say that, oh, people on the 8th, people started getting upset. No, man. That's just inaccurate. There's no way. On the 8th, everyone was on the side of Israel.
Must act proportionately in response. And I have a critique of this that I've often expressed, which is that there is such a thing as proportionality in warfare.
And furthermore, if anyone did have a response that early, it's probably because they know that Israel has done, and I think not quite to this level, but they have done stuff like this in the past where, again, they have been propping them up, and every few years, and this is the disgusting thing, they call it giving them a haircut. You can literally Google it. They call indiscriminate bombing of Palestinians giving them a haircut to trim out their population. And so, again, that would be akin to, well, here we go again. If he heard any sort of response stating that Israel was going to be responding in an outsized manner to October 7th. So, if anything, this just makes his case weaker in that Israel has done it before, acting disproportionately towards something that happened to them.
And at the same time, Israel is always accused of acting disproportionately. And the proportionality that much of the rest of the world seems to think Israel should express in warfare is to have an equal level of suffering or killing on both sides. I don't think there's any law of war that says that, if you kill 1,200 people and you kidnap another 250, that, as it were, the other side's allowed to do the same back. But that's what a lot of people think. And then when they see the death toll.
So then, given those numbers, current numbers, March 24th, more than 50,000 people, with nearly a third that are dead being under 18, which is children. So over, and that's probably a slight under recording, right? Because these are the official numbers from Reuters. 50,000 people versus what Douglas Murray was just stating, which is what he said, 1,200 or something or so ish. So you tell me if that seems proportionate and fair. I mean, you can make your own conclusions on that one, but I'm going to say it does not seem justifiable in my opinion.
Escalating on the Gazan side, they say Israel has acted disproportionately and has overreacted. That one is tricky because it's my belief that, I mean, again, this is a basic thing, but it has to be stated that 9 million citizens of Israel, if you extrapolate that out to what the 7th of October would have meant in American terms, you'd be talking about.
This is just a hilarious argument. Why are we trying to extrapolate to anything? This is just essentially trying to pad numbers and say, oh my God, if this was in America, this would be this maybe. Okay, well, if this was in China, it would be this many more people. So what? So what, man? No, what happened is what happened. And if you were to extrapolate the proportionality of Palestinians that have died over to Americans, that would be how many get out of here, man. Get out. What an awful, scummy argument to make.
A day on which, if the attack had happened in America, where 44,000 Americans were killed in one day and 10,000 American citizens taken hostage.
And here's the thing that's the most hilarious about that. Given the number that I literally had just pulled up, that still doesn't match the amount of Palestinians. So again, if you were to make it proportional to the United States, it would be a lot more than 50,000 that have already been murdered by Israel in Gaza. So, and again, 1/3 of them are children. So what are we even doing here? And this is why I wanted to watch the Lex Fridman one, because he actually talks, and you get to hear how stupid the argument for supporting these wars is.
Nobody can tell me that if such an atrocity occurred, that America would not do whatever it needed to destroy the groups that had done that and to retrieve the hostages who'd been taken.
So just on that point, I agree with you 100%. America would hit hard back. And I think a lot of Americans would feel justified in that. But it's also possible that the military-industrial complex and the politicians...
And a point I will make to that, but we would hit with our money. We're the global military power. We're not having Israel fund our war and give us bombs and missiles and anti-air defense. And the shoe is not, if the shoe is on the other foot, we would do it ourselves. We did do it ourselves with 9/11. Yes, some countries kind of helped out, but we did it with our own military might. Like, get out of here. This is just funny to me because, again, they're spending our money. And I don't want my money going to a genocide that you can't even properly justify, because even if you were to scale it up to the size of the U.S., it still is not as many people as many Palestinians as Israelis have killed.
Would do something like the war in Iraq and Afghanistan, which means extend far beyond hitting back and actually do a thing that's destructive to everybody, including America financially, and the flourishing of America and the flourishing of humanity broadly, and the region, and the stability, and the war on terrorism, if that's a real thing. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan did not maybe succeed in defeating terrorism or even making progress. It probably made more terrorists than not. So,
and this is a very strong argument that I agree with 100%, is that doing these bombings and stuff doesn't actually solve anything. And I kind of talked to it a little bit before, but he's exactly hitting the nail on the head, where you're just infuriating the people in this region and you're creating more anti-American sentiment, so that later in the future, there's a higher probability of terrorist attacks being executed against America from these regions. So you're actually harming us by participating in this region of the world, in these types of conflicts.
So there's a justified feeling of hitting back and going after somebody like bin Laden in the case of 9/11. And then there's just the actual implementation.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems like the implementation can sometimes, intended or unintended, have consequences that are bordering on war crimes, if not downright war crimes. Now, this is a general statement. And now we'll look at Israel, where things are small land everything is very compact. There's a lot of complexities that are well studied that we've talked about extensively.
Well, the two stated aims of the Israelis after the 7th were to get the hostages back and to destroy Hamas. And many people said that you could do one but not both. And
that's kind of hilarious because factually, Bibi Netanyahu and the Israeli government, his cabinet, have turned down or held up hostage negotiations multiple times. So that's not even... They basically in my opinion, set goals that they thought that Hamas would never agree to, and then it's the same thing as propping them up. Then when they don't achieve those goals, you just go, oh, well, they won't work with us at all. I mean, yeah, okay, because that wasn't really... You didn't think that would be on the table, and then when it turned out to be so, you just basically, oh, this is a bridge too far. We can't agree to this for no reason at all. And so, again, it's just trying to justify the war in whatever way possible.
And I actually think they've gone a long way to doing both. By no means everything. There are still hostages, as we're speaking, held in Gaza, including a young American. And Hamas is not completely destroyed. It's very, very significantly degraded, but it's not completely destroyed. But those are the two aims. I believe that, I mean, I've seen as much of the war as any outside observer. I don't know, there are some exceptions maybe, and so I think I can say with considerable certainty what the Israelis have and haven't done. There were various operations at the beginning, various plans which didn't happen, like storming straight in and getting, for instance, as many hostages as possible out of the Shifa complex, which is called a hospital, but it's also at the very least the Hamas command headquarters. And there was a plan to maybe go and do that fast, but it was avoided because of the number of deaths on all sides that would be likely to happen. The Israelis did actually hold back at the beginning. There was a period of making sure that when they went into Gaza, they didn't do so in any way blind. But Gaza is a very built-up area, and population-wise is densely populated. Something, by the way, which the people who
which again makes my point with those bombing pictures, where it is densely populated, and this is what you're just murdering so many people because it's all built up on top of each other. So like for them to completely level it, yeah, you're not. I mean, it's insane.
Claim frivolously that Israel has been committing genocide, never take account of, which is the fact that the Gazan population has boomed since the Israeli withdrawal in 2005. It's almost doubled. But yeah, it's a densely populated area, and it's an incredibly difficult place for the train of war because of one thing in particular, which is that Hamas goes back a bit to our conversation earlier, but this is a much more extreme example. I mean, Hamas really don't play by the rules. In fact, they use the rules of war.
No one in guerrilla warfare plays by the rules. That's literally the entire objective of guerrilla warfare.
Or the laws of war completely to their own advantage. You know, it has to be reiterated. You are not meant to disguise your army as civilians. You're not meant to use places of care like hospitals as bases for your military operations. You're not meant to use schools and places of worship as operating centers of war. And Hamas does all of these things and has always done so. And it does so with the very obvious reason that for them, the whole thing is a 2-for-1 offer. You get to operate everywhere. And if the Israelis operate anywhere, you claim that this is a war crime, because how could they attack this group of civilians, these people who are dressed as civilians, these people merely fighting from a mosque, and so on. And that's why everybody who's been to Gaza, who's seen the fighting, knows the same thing, which is this is just incredibly difficult warfare of a kind.
Which to this, then I say, so then what? You have to have some end game victory. What is that? What is that? I think a logical person would say you get all your hostages back, which I think they have most, if not all of them back. And then number two, you've already well surpassed a disproportionate amount of killings in the other direction. So just wrap it up. Wrap it up. We're done here. Like, you have to have an end state to it. It's just not indiscriminate bombing forever that the U.S. is paying for. That's why people are starting to get sick of it, is because if you actually look at the numbers and what's being done with our money, we're getting fed up with it. It increases inflation here because we're just printing money and sending it over there. So what are we doing here? Like, this is why everyone's fed up, is there's no end goal, there's no end state. So for you to just say, yeah, it's an impossible war, then why are we even fighting it? Why are we fighting? You have to set goals and you have to set an end. And that's what frustrates me about it, and I think a lot of people as well, is that there's no end in sight to it. So what are we doing here?
I find that American troops have seen in the last 20 years in Fallujah and elsewhere, Kurdish militia, the Peshmerga, saw when they were fighting as our frontline troops in the war against ISIS, similar house to house, but by no means with the same entrenched bases. Again, it can't be stressed enough that Hamas has used the years since the Israeli withdrawal from 2005 to build this vast underground tunnel network. And again, it's obvious, but
the funny thing is about this, I'm pretty sure that Israel had a bunch of those made themselves as well. That was some of the reporting that I had seen, is that Israel actually built a bunch of these tunnels themselves. So to phrase it as like, oh yeah, Hamas built all of them, I think that's a little bit disingenuous, if that's true, which from the source that I heard it from, I doubt that it would be false.
It has to be remembered when, and I quote one of the Hamas leaders in the book saying this in an interview, when they build their tunnels, they do so in order that their tunnels are used by them, Hamas, to store their weaponry, to secure their fighters, and to hold hostages. They do not build their underground tunnel networks for the safety of Gazan civilians avoiding aerial bombardment. And every difference in the world seems to me to exist between a country which does build bomb shelters for its citizens,
and even just to this point, aren't there other countries that build bunkers or military installments or bases or whatever they can afford to protect their own country and their own civilians and their own armies and their own whatever? So again, like, if they have been attacked in the past and they say, oh, we know this happens regularly, then why wouldn't they build their own tunnel system to protect their own troops? So again, this is a stupid argument. Does Israel have a bunch of outposts around Gaza, around any Palestinian settlements, or any Palestinian areas? Do they not have outposts? It's literally the same thing. It's literally a military installment that's built for the protection of your own fighting force. So to try and vilify it as something that's uniquely evil, that no other country does, is laughable.
And a government which builds bomb shelters for its bombs.
To the point, the underlying point you made of why do so many people want to call him evil? And so the implication is it's not just a hatred of Israel. There's an ocean of hatred for the Jews.
Yes.
Why is there so much hatred for Jews in the world?
I would say there's one reason in particular. It's a stupid and gullible person's easy answer. Why do certain things happen in the world? What is our explanation of chance or unfairness or any number of things? Easiest, stupidest person's explanation is there's a small group of people doing it.
Let's not say stupidest, because there's
This is really funny. No, I think the reason why people don't like them, especially in America, is that they have a lobbying group called AIPAC, which spends enormous sums of money on particular candidates for the House, for the Senate, for presidential elections, that they're trying to prop up the people that they think will be most beneficial to them. It's literally the only foreign government that is allowed to give campaign finances for U.S. elections. I would say election interference would be number one on my list of why, and I don't dislike them as a group of people, because I have friends that are Jewish, and a small group of people or the Israeli government does not represent all Jews. That's an insane statement to make, and it makes no sense. So for me, the issue is that you're interfering in our elections. You're currently executing a genocide in Gaza, and we are funding it. We're giving you hundreds of billions of dollars to execute said genocide. And I think a lot of people are fed up with that. I mean, those are three huge reasons. Any one of those alone, I could see as being a reason why people are fed up with Israel. Not Jews in general, not the Jewish, again, because you have to talk about Jews, the group of people, Jew, the religion, and Israel. These are three separate entities. And while there is overlap in some amount of that, I think most people are fed up with Israel and the government therein. Not the people living in Israel. The fact that we are propping up a genocide with hundreds of billions of dollars, and then they're also allowed to make campaign finance donations in the United States. I think that's what people are fed up with.
There's something in the human mind that craves a nice, clean theory of everything, right? That explains all the problems. It's not just stupidest.
Okay, let me reiterate. Lowest grade.
Right, because
lowest grade.
I have that desire too to simplify everything. Like,
be a bit anti-Semitic. What?
We've all been a bit anti-Semitic here and there. Just get a few vodkas. To find. I mean, maybe this is a mathematician in me. It's like to find a simple explanation for everything.
Right.
That's nice for everything. Historians do this.
Absolutely.
Like,
I agree.
Analyzing why the Roman Empire collapsed. It's so nice to have one, especially if it's a counterintuitive explanation. It's one of the favorite go-tos, right? It's an explanation for all the problems in the world.
It's the lowest resolution analysis imaginable.
Why is there traffic? Why did my wife leave me? Why did my wife cheating on me? Why did I lose my job? Why did I not get the job? So even on the personal level.
Especially on the personal level. Why did I not get everything? Somebody must have held me back.
Yeah. And it's just that hatred of Jews has been such a popular go-to throughout history that you just always return back to the hits, I guess. And what is it special about the Jews as a group that people love to hate? Is it just because it's a small number of people?
I think it's several things.
Successful.
One is small and without by any means saying this is a general rule, but disproportionately highly accomplished in certain fields at certain times. Prominent is the word I would use. Prominent, slightly beyond their numbers in certain places. It's not a full explanation. I mean,
I think another issue is, and just kind of coattailing on that pseudo explanation he gave there, when you're also highly involved in industries that people view as now, and I'm not saying this is a true connection, but I think some people probably think this, is that there are industries that have spiraled out of control and are disproportionately unfair to people's lived experience in the world today in the United States. One example of that is banking, right? Where it just feels like, when you're getting slammed with fees and I'm not even saying that Jewish people have a hand in this, but when historically Jews have been associated with banking, and then there's stereotypes that have gone through, and the banking system feels unfair, and you are blaming it for the root of what's going wrong in your life, or one of the things. Well, then it's easy to ascribe blame to that group of people. And I'm not saying that's right at all, but I'm saying that is a scenario where, yes, them being tied or tightly associated with something like banking, one sector that has over time become corrupted and has become unfair to the average American, well then, yeah, that's going to piss you off if you're associated towards that group of people, if you're associated tightly with that. Just my thought. And again, I don't think that's fair, but that would be a reason why.
All sorts of historic reasons why Jews were involved in banking. But then there are lots of historic reasons why the Scottish people, my own, were involved in banking. And to this day, you don't find many people who blame all international finance problems on the Scots. So there are just like easy grooves for people to fall into, it seems to me.
We should also mention, banking for some reason. Money is a thing that people go to, but Jews have been disproportionately successful in the sciences and engineering, mathematics,
yes,
and the arts and so on.
But notice how that's not the example that they or I jump to, because those are all viewed as mostly positive things. So again, I think it's just being so closely associated to that sector, and in recent years, it being a negative experience for the average American citizen.
A simple person would try to work out why that is and see what is replicable. I don't want to use the word stupid again now. A different type of person.
I'm triggered already.
A different type of person would look at that and say, that must mean they took something from me. And that's, the most zero-sum game there is. It's an endlessly fascinating subject, because it seems to me that anti-Semitism is almost certainly a sort of ineradicable temptation of the human spirit at its ugliest.
I hate this argument so much. Like, it's not anti-Semitism. This is one of those things where I think it's essentially just playing the victim. Where, yes, awful things happened in Nazi Germany and World War II, but then to constantly go back to it and say we're always the victim. Whatever happens to us, we're just a persecuted group of people. I'm sorry. Yes, that situation and that instance was horrible, but you can't execute a genocide and say anyone who criticizes you is anti-Semitic. That just doesn't work. That doesn't make any sense. So, like, to continue to go back to that well of, like, oh, anti-Semitism because World War II. World War II! World War II! Don't you remember World War II? Shut up. Shut up. No one cares about that anymore. Yes, it was, I mean, people care about it, right? But, like, you can't use that as an excuse for the rest of time to justify doing atrocious, awful things. So I just hate that argument so much where it's like, whoa, World War II. No.
And cheapest. But it because it's back in our day, it bears some analysis again. And I would say two things about it. One is, as I and others have said many times in the past, one of the fascinating things about anti-Semitism is that it can cover everything at once. So the Jews get hated for being rich and for being poor, both for being the Rothschilds and for being Eastern European Jews escaping the pogroms. They can be hated for being religious and for being anti-religious and producing Marxism, for instance. Hated for religiosity and secularism. They can be hated for, most recently, not having a state and therefore being rootless cosmopolitans, and also hated for having a state. And that makes it something very unusual, actually, in the history of human bigotry and, bias and ugliness. But the real thing is, one of my great heroes, Vasily Grossman, says at the center of Life and Fate, almost everything that is worth saying about anti-Semitism, and it's Grossman's genius that he could say in 3 to 4 pages what most people couldn't say in an entire life, even after a life of study. But there's this passage in Life and Fate that I quote in my book, which is just bowled me over when I read it some years ago, when he says, the interesting thing about anti-Semitism, he says you can meet it everywhere, in the Academy of Sciences and in the games that children play in the yard. But Grossman's great insight is, he says, everywhere it tells you not about the Jews, but about the person making the claim. And the most important gift he gives in his analysis is when he describes it as a mirror to the person who is making the claims, culminating in this phrase I've been trying to make popular, which is, he says, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, I'll tell you what you're guilty of. It's a searingly brilliant insight.
Yeah, he really loves that statement, and I think it's incredibly hilarious because, again, I want to draw a line of distinction here. I don't dislike the Jews, but if you're talking about Israel and you want to lump them in, then, again, genocide, I'm not genocidal. I have never harmed a single person. Siphoning off U.S. funds, if anything, I've only ever paid in taxes. So I have not cheated the U.S. system. And influencing elections, which I have never made a campaign contribution in my entire life. So those are my 3 criticisms. So I'm not sure how that mirror, I've never done any of those 3 things. So I think that's just patently false. That's just a stupid statement that is made when you don't have an actual argument and you're just trying to build up paper tigers to fight. So, I'm glad that I get to talk about that statement because it's so dumb and it makes no sense whatsoever. It's something that someone says to try and sound intelligent when they have no real argument to fall back onto.
The Iranian revolutionary government accuses Israel of being a colonial power. The Iranian revolutionary government has been colonizing the Middle East throughout our lifetimes. The Turkish government accuses the Jewish state of being guilty of occupation. Do you know northern Cyprus? The Turks have been occupying half of Cyprus since the 1970s. Cyprus is an EU member state and Turkey is in NATO. So you can do this on and on.
And in fact, there's even a better way to even phrase that. So in this example, okay, he's talking about Israel, not the Jews. So again, you're not drawing a line of distinction. You're being disingenuous in the way that you're framing this and saying that anti-Semitism towards Jews is the same thing as criticizing Israeli government. So just call those other governments hypocritical and they shouldn't be criticizing you. That's a better way to say it. It's not trying to frame it as anti-Semitism and holding up a mirror, and that just doesn't. Again, it's a bait. He's trying to do a bait and switch and say that if you accuse the Jews of anything, well, you're anti-Semitic, and you are just as much to blame for whatever criticisms you have towards them. So you can't be, so you're morally corrupt, and you shouldn't. Your criticism is invalid. That literally doesn't make any sense. And it's a straw man. It doesn't. Yeah.
The people who accuse the Jewish state, like the people who accuse Jews of something, almost without fail, is the thing they're guilty of. Look at the supporters of Hamas and Hamas. One of the things they say is that Israel is guilty of indiscriminate killing. Hamas? Hello? What were you doing on the 7th? You see, there are these crazy guys online who repeatedly claim that for some reason Israeli soldiers will rape Palestinians when they meet them, whether in a prison or on the battlefield or in a hospital. It erupts occasionally. These people go around and say, "Oh my God, the IDF are rapists." Okay. Excuse me? You're the ones who spent the years after 2016 saying believe all women. Then from the 7th of October said believe all women except for Jewish women who say they've been raped or seen their friends raped. And then you say...
His arguments are just so awful. It's insane to me. I never said believe... I mean, I guess he's attacking leftists. I never said believe all women. And I think the IDF has raped a lot of people. And he's just trying to pass it off by saying, well, all these other groups don't believe all women, he's trying to criticize them for that. And then he's also saying, again, I fully believe that they probably were raped, but also the IDF is doing it too. And he's just trying to misdirect it to he's completely rug pulling it, where he starts off with one argument and then, let me discredit it by saying that Israeli women were raped and that the U.S. doesn't believe them. You're not even addressing what the actual point is. So, get out of here, man. Get out of here.
Aha, the Jews are rapists. You've been carrying water for rapists and then go and accuse the Jews of rape. I mean, it just works. Every way you do it, it works. I do think the thing of psychological projection in the case of Israel is wild. I mean, it is wild. By the way, there's an interesting thing on this that I try to get into in the book, which is this thing of why did so much of the world respond the way it did? I mean, we're sitting in New York. There was not one protest against Hamas in New York after the 7th of October. The Believe All Women crowd didn't come out against Hamas's rapes. The Black Lives Matter movement did not turn their attention to the killing of Israeli children or anything. Nobody did it. Nobody.
And do you know why? In my opinion, it's because that was a flashpoint single thing. It's not like there was a habitual whatever, pick out any of the 5 things he just listed. It's not like there's a habitual act from the Palestinians constantly doing this to a population that they are the oppressors of or that they oversee. So for Israel to be on a continual, again, October 7th, as horrible as it was one day. The bombing of Gaza has been going on for over a year with U.S. funding, with our money. We weren't funding all those awful things that the Palestinians did. We are funding the awful things that Israel is doing. So we are allowed to say, I don't want our money to go to these acts. I don't see how that's not justified.
Nobody did it. The one thing that did happen very prominently was that people came out to attack the people who'd been attacked. And as I say in the opening of the book, I saw that myself down the road from here in Times Square on October the 8th. October the frigging 8th. The protests are in Times Square against Israel, justifying the attacks that were still going on. And this is something that deserves deep self-examination on behalf of people in the West who've seen this movement overwhelm parts of our society. I mean, degraded parts, but parts, bits of the university.
And just to pull up what he's talking about, is essentially Palestinians living here who basically know the history that I've kind of laid out, where they've constantly done this in the past. And so they came out and knew that then Israel was going to fight back. So he's essentially stating this, that, they came out and no. It was Palestinians, and it's not even that. It's what, maybe 100 people, maybe. Like, get out of here, man. Yeah, okay, it happened, but like, not to the levels that that now U.S. citizens are becoming outraged with this now.
And so on. And I think there's an explanation for it, by the way, which again goes back to that issue of projection. When you and I last talked on camera, we were talking about my last book, The War on the West, and I remember saying to you there that one of the things I was talking about in that book was the deeply, deeply, wildly biased, unfair, and inaccurate estimation of the Western past, whereby, America's original sin had to be identified, and the original sin is slavery. So America has an original sin. Does Ghana have an original sin? No one knows. No one really would think it polite to point one out.
What are you talking about, man? I think their original sin was rounding up people to ship to America. If America is blamed for slavery, which is fair, it's not like we went over to Africa and started rounding people up to take them over here. I think that was their own population. So you can't absolve them of things that they've done, and also blame the U.S. Yes, it was awful what happened, but guess what? It's not happening now, and you can't blame people that are alive today for sins of the past, because otherwise everyone everywhere is guilty of something.
And you go on and on with these things that I identified in the War on the West, these sins of the West, and they have in recent years been reduced to the claim that countries like the one we're sitting in are guilty of what? Colonialism, settler colonialism, white supremacy, slavery, genocide, and a couple of others you can throw in probably. One of the things I remember saying to you when we spoke about that was that one of the deep problems of setting up that system of thought, pseudo-thought, non-thought, would-be thought, is that there's nothing you can do about it. Even if it was true, there's nothing you can do about it. If it turned out that your ancestors in the 18th century once owned a slave, what are you going to do? There's no mechanism to forgive or be forgiven because you didn't do it, and there's no one alive who could accept the apology. And I remember setting it up there in the War on the West. I set up like this very, very risky, dangerous, unforgivable, unforgiving thing that had been set up about our societies. But I would say that since October the 7th, there has been an answer for a certain type of person, which is, I am from a society where I have been told I am guilty of settler colonialism, white supremacy, genocide, ethnic cleansing, and more. I've been told all of these things. I have been put in an unget-outable of situation of moral burden that can never be relieved because I can't ask anyone's forgiveness and nobody can forgive me. But here's a country which I can accuse of all of these things in the here and now. Load my energies, my guilts, my burdens onto. And what's more,
The thing about this is that that only works if you have guilt about these things. Like, when he's talking about, there's all this guilt of, I don't have any guilt for any of that. I just don't want us to be involved in conflicts in the Middle East. I don't think it's productive. I don't think it's doing anything beneficial for you, me, anyone, except for if you work for a defense contractor. Like, literally, that's what my issue, and I think most people's issue is with it. It's not passing off. I'm sure the people that he hangs out with, they have white grief. They have white, survivorship, and, oh my God, this is all, I've been told what a horrible person I am. I just don't care what those people say, because I know that in my life, I'm nice to everyone, I'm a good person, and at the end of the day, I don't have any guilt about any of that stuff that he's trying to frame. So it's not that I'm taking my guilt and, they are less virtuous than me, so now I can attack them for the moral injustices that they're inflicting on other people. No, man, I just don't think we should be over there doing things. I have no guilt. Just because the people you hang out with are wrought with guilt for the awful things that I'm sure they've done in their lives, doesn't mean that every single person in the United States operates under those same pretenses.
I might be able to end it, and by doing so, would relieve myself. And in other words, I tweak Grossman with the people in America and elsewhere who've fallen into this trap. I tweak him by saying, on this occasion, tell me what you accuse the Jews of, and I'll tell you what you've been told you're guilty of.
Yeah, it's an interesting kind of projection. Just to observe some of the sociological phenomena here on top of all this, it does seem that hatred of Jews gets a lot of engagement online.
Mm-hmm.
Is this... So I watch it like a curiosity, like I'm an alien observing Earth. Is this dangerous to you, or is it just a bunch of trolls and grifters, let's say cosplaying as Nazis? It's just
could be both. Fun
to trigger the libs.
It could be all of those things. I think it is, and a lot more.
So my take on that is, that's a good question. I think it is probably a little bit of both. And again, I think continuing to carry out this war, I don't think everyone is capable in thinking about and articulating the points that I've made up until now. So when you have groups of people that just feel, and we'll just say Americans right now, that are terminally online, right? Because I think Lex is talking about probably seeing it become more prominent on X, right? Is that, yes, part of it is it's just trolling and it's going around along with the crowd, but then the other part of it is, and I think this is the other dangerous part, is that the longer that you allow for the bombing to continue carrying on, the higher probability that people are going to continue to become more and more fed up with we'll just call it the Israeli government. And then they project their discontent with the Israeli government onto Jews. They're not able to draw that distinction. They don't see the three separate groups. a lot of people just lump them all together. And it's not only that you're building up, as I had mentioned before, hate for the U.S. from the Middle East, but you're also building up hate for the Jews inside of the U.S. because they say, I'm being told that it's, all this military spending is ramping up inflation. I'm already fed up with the military-industrial complex to begin with. There's the negative stereotypes of banking as banking continues to get worse and worse. There's all these things. Why are they getting all this money when my life is abjectly awful or horrible? There's all these things that, and I don't think it's correct, but your lived experience, you're going to try and externalize. Most people try and externalize the things and play victim. This happened to me. So the longer this goes on and the longer we're seeing, a genocide being carried out and all those other things I just mentioned, the more pissed off people are going to be towards the Jews. Incorrectly so, in my opinion, but that's just going to be the nature of it. So by taking aggressive actions and interfering in America, Israel is making their citizens and their people who follow their religion and are of their descent more in danger everywhere else. I mean, you can think through that however you want, but I think that is just objectively true.
I mean, taboos can be fun to break, I suppose. And I suppose there are some people online who have grown up knowing that, since the Holocaust, anti-Semitism was taboo. And they've run out of, it goes back to what we were saying earlier a bit, they sort of run out of, they've got bored of that, Holocaust, schmolocaust, they'd say, you got it, I've heard enough about that. And maybe those people have gone off in a funny direction as a result, but I don't think that's the main, I think that's like a detail compared to the real thing. The real thing is that anti-Semitism is back, and there is a certain type of person who's loving it.
Is it really back? So I watch.
Well, it never goes away. It's just that it's since the 7th. I think that it's had a great resurgence, and this isn't to say, and that
this doesn't even make sense. Why would it? I mean, I guess yes, ticking up incrementally as Israel has bombed Gaza, but like, oh yeah, anti-Semitism just came back on October 7th. What? Like, what are you talking about, man? This is literally just, again, it's building a straw man or a ghost. Oh, there's anti-Semitism. Anti-Semitism, just blame it on anti-Semitism. Like, the country is doing it to themselves, man. I think it's a slow tick up from what we have witnessed over the last year and a half. But that's just my opinion.
Doesn't mean that any criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. No, it doesn't. But, as I have often said, if you don't ever express any interest in the murder of Muslims in Syria, not any interest in genocide in Sudan, or killing of hundreds of thousands of people in Yemen, but on the 8th of October you're on the street with a placard attacking Israel, I'm sorry, you're an anti-Semite, for sure. You may not know you are, but that's what's motivating you.
I guess.
I mean, he can have that take, right? My take is just we shouldn't be participating in any of these things. We should leave that entire area alone. They can all Hatfield and McCoy each other until the end of time. I don't care. I'm not interested. I just don't want my money to go to it. I don't want my life to become worse because we're sending hundreds of billions of dollars over there.
It's a lot of engagement. I watch it.
It does.
I watch it.
But it's one of several things you can always see get huge engagement. I mean, it's like if you say that there's like a massive pedophile ring run by prominent politicians, it might be total horseshit. It's likely to be total horseshit, but it'll also get a hell of a lot of engagement.
Yeah, but that's still so the pedophile ring, like, Epstein Island, that kind of stuff. It's
all
pretty,
which is very interesting.
yeah, and it's like, great, all right, cool. Let's get behind that conspiracy. But the Jews thing, the hatred of Jews is still, that's the greatest hits still.
It is. And I mean, you see it with, some of the people who've made minor celebrities of themselves with a sort of made up version of history, with a smattering of this and a little bit of that. And then the just asking questions and, I'm not saying, but, and all, there's certain, rhetorical sleights of hand that have helped this along. But as I said earlier, it's just the lowest grade explanation of a certain type of mind looking for a pattern and looking for meaning. And I mean, I can give you just one quick example of why that in the case of Israel is so extraordinary, is the number of otherwise semi-intelligent people who will tell you that the problem is simply that the Israelis need to give the Palestinians another state. And that if they do, it will solve the problems of the region and the wider world. And irrespective of the fact that the Palestinians are being given several states, the claim that this particular land dispute would unlock every other injustice in the world should be seen on its face to be preposterous. There is no reason why, if the Palestinians got another state, either in Gaza or in parts of Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, there is no reason why we should expect the economy of Yemen to boom.
This we can agree on. Again, I think it goes way deeper. It's something that we're never going to solve. Even living next to each other, like these groups hate each other. It would, if they gave them autonomy, I think it would help reduce tensions in the region, but it's never going to solve it. And that's why I said we just need to not be participating in that area in general, because nothing we do is going to make it better, and they need to just solve it themselves. It's not going to get done in my lifetime. It's not going to get done in your lifetime, but good luck, And so for us to, again, put our noses in places where it doesn't belong, I think it just makes it less safe for you, less safe for me, less safe for everyone. And we should not be participating. But thank you for listening. I'm going to kind of chop it up a little bit because it is a little bit long, and I just want to make sure that I hit my points against some of the actual things that were interesting that he was saying. But I wanted to make sure I covered some of the points and provide my opinion on some of my opinions on why I think most of the people I talk to are generally getting fed up with Israel, and to a lesser extent the Ukraine as well. Because, again, we're just inserting ourselves into different areas. I can do one on Ukraine separately, but I really wanted to cover Israel because it feels like Ukraine is kind of winding down. But I think it's very much the same thing, where we're just fed up with these forever wars and shipping out money, and it's causing inflation and hurting people back here in the U.S. So, again, thank you for watching. I realize that this is a very touchy subject, and if you found this video insightful at all, or some of my viewpoints illuminating, if you could drop a like on the video, I'd really appreciate it. If you have questions, or if there's something else that you would like me to cover, drop that in the comments. Hit subscribe if you want to see more content from me. Again, trying to grow the channel, and that really helps out. Other than that, I hope you have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.